Hi all, Adi here from Haunts and Johns. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. It's a very cold winter's day, which is why I'm doing this intro in the car. So I got my hat, got my big winter coat ready. I'm in deepest, darkest Sussex, and I'm in a little village called Bramber. Very unique, this little church that we're going to today. It's called St. Nicholas. What makes it unique is that it's right on the edge of a moat that went around Bramber Castle, which was home to the de Brose family, which were like a Norman family, and they were given the land in 1060s, just after the Norman conquest. And this church would have sat right on the edge of the castle, but some people believe that it may have been enclosed within the walls of the castle. Now, it's obviously not the original church, but there are still some features. It's been restored many times over the centuries, and I feel really lucky because I met a lovely man in Stenning Museum, which is just up the road. I'll be doing another video from there very soon, and he volunteers there, and he is actually the church warden here at St. Nick's, and his dad was before him as well. So he has offered very kindly to give up his time, and he's going to show me around. I'm not sure if he'll want to be on the video, so I'll probably just have a little chat with him, get him to show me around, and then I shall make a little video. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting. So yeah, let's go. I thought as we're walking up to St. Nicholas, up to the church, I'd give you a little bit of a history about this beautiful tiny little village. It's tiny, it's quiet, but it's packed with so much history, oddities, ruined castles, and it even at one stage had an eccentric museum. So historically, Bramber, believe it or not, used to actually be a port, and not just a minor one. Back in the medieval period, the River Ada, which runs through the village, was much wider and much deeper than it is now. The big ships could come right up to Bramber, making it a key point for trade, toll collection and travel. The Normans knew this, which is exactly why they built Bramber Castle here in the 11th century. It wasn't just for show, it was strategically placed to control river traffic and secure the port. Over time, though, the river silted up, the coastline shifted south, and Bramber slowly transformed from a river port into the quiet, quaint inland village that we see today. So that Tudor beamed building that we saw a couple of minutes ago is called St. Mary's Court. It was most famously, it served as a temperance hotel, which in the 19th century the temperance movement encouraged people to stay off alcohol. So instead of checking into a hotel and having a nice pint, you were probably offered a cup of tea and some wholesome Victorian moral encouragement to stay off the alcohol. Today it's a private residence. It's been beautifully restored, and it's one of the standout historic buildings in the village, which you can visit during the summer months. Now, this building was the Potter's Museum, and it's probably the quirkiest piece of Bramber's history. Well, you may never have heard of it, but it was a 19th century taxidermy collection where animals were arranged in human-like scenes. We're talking like kittens having a tea party, squirrels playing cards. It was the eccentric creation of Mr. Walter Potter, and for years Bramber was its home. The museum was a major attraction through the 20th century, equal parts charming and slightly unsettling for some. Although the collection has since been sold and scattered, people still remember Bramber as the place where this wonderfully odd displays once lived, and I do believe there are some videos on YouTube that you can check out if you're interested a bit more. Now, just walking up the steps to St. Nicholas Church, and on the right hand side is the building that used to be the old schoolhouse, although it's now a private residence. If you do want to visit St. Nicholas Church, there also is a very small car park, but it's deeply potholed, so bear that in mind if you're going to drive up. So the church goes all the way back to shortly after the Norman conquest, when the land was given to the de Brosses family. It was said to be finished about 1073 and was originally built to serve Bramber Castle. So it served the garrison and the de Brosses family, who were the Norman lords in the area at the time. St Nicholas is actually the oldest post-conquest Norman church in Sussex, at least in terms of its surviving structure. It was intentionally built close to the castle, so the two have formed a kind of administrative and spiritual centre for the new Norman territory. And the local monks ended up being moved to St Peter's Church in Beeding, I believe, but that's another church and I shall visit that another day. So over time the church has survived fires, many repairs, Victorian restorations and really general medieval chaos. There's a huge amount of Norman architecture still intact, and you can see this little guy up here. Hello there, quite a stout chap. And you'll notice the thick stone walls, and there's loads of semicircular arches and the simple fortress-like feel. It's one of those places where you can really sense the centuries of history laid into the stone. And you've got this lovely sweeping graveyard. But look at those beautiful views over the South Downs. The church just has one bell, and unfortunately they don't know how old it is. The Knights Templar also briefly had a house in Bramber, although whose residents would have known St Nicholas Church. There was also a leper colony nearby, St Mary Magdalene, in the area of Bramber, now known as the Magdalens. The inmates were not permitted access to St Nicholas Church because it had its very fashionable and very important congregation. So instead it went to St Botolph's Church in Botolph's Village, where the lepers were provided with 2 squint windows to watch the services from afar. I mean, look at those stunning views. And here you can see more of the arches, and you can see there's loads of different brickwork here. I mean, there's loads of flintstone here, but if you look closer, there's all sorts of stuff going on here. Look at that. And then you've got some little small stones, so who knows if that was a repair or who knows. But yeah, there's a lot going on there. And then there's got that big ditch going around the side of it. Just on the right there you can see some of the ruins, and down that ditch there on the right is the moat, or the big ditches that went around Bramber Castle, so you can see how close it is. Now, over the years, Bramber Castle is said to have sheltered many members of English nobility and the royal family. King John spent 3 days there when travelling from Canterbury to Winchester. Edward I was there at least 5 times. And also King Charles II, who was fleeing to France, is known to have passed through the villages, although we don't know if he actually ever went to pray in St Nicholas Church. But I am doing a separate video on Bramber Castle because there's just too much to unpack into one, so I will post that one next week after I post this one. I personally think that what makes St Nicholas extra interesting is that its identity was so important in the Middle Ages. Remember, the village grew because of the castle, and the castle needed the church not just for worship but for administration and authority. The church was also served by a college of clergy, almost like a small religious community, which tells you this wasn't just your average rural parish church. It functioned as a kind of spiritual headquarters for the whole
of the Norman estate. And because Bramber was a port at the time, St Nicholas would have seen merchants, soldiers, travellers and local traders coming through. It was a much busier, more bustling place than the quiet village we see today. I think the real highlight of St Nicholas Church, the thing that gets history fans and us church nerds genuinely excited, is the set of Norman carved capitals. Capitals are basically the decorative tops of columns, and the ones here are kind of a big deal. They're some of the earliest and best surviving examples of Norman stone carving in Sussex, which is wild considering Bramber isn't exactly a huge medieval city. When you look at them, you'll see all sorts of designs going on. There's interlaced patterns, leafy plant-like shapes, neat geometric designs, and there's even a few little weird faces carved into the stone. And that's just a little plaque there showing that Mr. William Wilberforce, if you know who he was, I will do another video on something that's related to him in another video. And here's some of the foliage left from a lovely wedding that had taken place the weekend before. So the stonework would have been carved not long after 1066. It was probably the same travelling craftsmen who were working on the big Norman projects around the country. What makes them so impressive is the level of details. The Norman didn't just throw up a basic church out here. They brought out or in, whatever way around you want to put that, some very skilled stonemasons to show off their style and make their mark on England. And honestly, when you're standing here looking at all this stuff, you can really feel the history. And there's also, behind that wooden screen, there is a painting, but it's just in a really bad state of repair over the years because it got damaged and lime washed. So unfortunately it's completely covered up now. Beautiful church. I'm just going to head back out into the graveyard now. Lovely old doors. Talking to a local who's just told me a lovely little story about when he was a boy, about 50 years ago. He used to cut the veg down there, cut the grass. He used to get a little bit of pocket money for it. And one day he hit something and all the springs and all bits were coming out from the lawnmower. So he went around and he gathered up all the pieces to put it all back together again, and one of the springs was missing, and he looked absolutely everywhere. And his mum was here, and his mum said, "Oh, you need to say a prayer to Saint Anthony, who apparently is the saint of lost things." So he says his little prayer to Saint Anthony, and he said there's a footpath down there and two nuns were walking past, and they said to him, "Oh, young man, would you happen to be looking for this spring?" So what an amazing story. And he's saying that every time he sees that veg, it just makes him smile because he thinks about his little prayer to Saint Anthony. So whether you're a believer or a non-believer, I just think it's a lovely little story. So the gentleman also said that they used to find all sorts of relics around this churchyard. There was a lot of black magic apparently being practiced, and they would come up the next day and they would find strange things sitting on the fences and in the churchyard. They've got no idea what was going on apart from it was black magic. So there we go. We are close to Chanctonbury Ring, which obviously has a lot of links with the very infamous occultist Aleister Crowley. I found this beautiful headstone. It's quite unusual to be able to still read one that's this old. Look, nearly 300 years old. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I really do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you could please hit the like and subscribe button, I really would appreciate it. It really does help my little YouTube channel. There's also a little hype button down there that you can hit, and that really gives the video a boost. Helps the algorithm, and every little helps when you're a little channel like mine. And there's also a link down there where if you want to support me, you can buy me a coffee, and that way it helps me make a little donation to these most amazing historic buildings, because they're very expensive to upkeep. So thanks again for watching, and I shall see you for the next one. Bye for now.